What do you say we give our little mini Tomahawk project another go? I've got another mini railroad spike that was made at a roughly 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch by 3 inch salvage spring material. I think it might be a little oversized because it just looks like more material than that, but I think we'll get the idea and we'll still get to make a little mini Tomahawk out of it. I've got a slitting chisel that was made out of a piece of S7 in that same 1/2 by 1/2 by 3 inch size, and this will be what we're going to try now. If you remember, or if you were watching, we made one attempt at this with a punch instead of a chisel, and we ended up breaking the eye, or I ended up breaking the eye. You guys didn't have anything to do with that. So we're going to do it again, and we're going to try a slitting chisel, and then we've got a little mini drift we're going to use. So we're going to go to the forge. I'm going to start by upsetting the end to get some mass to spread into the blade of the axe, and then we'll do the eye. Even though I'm going to do the upset first, I'm going to go ahead and mark for the eye and put a chisel mark in cold so I can find it again. I'm just making a nice educated guess on where I want the eye. This really only matters if you're trying to make repeated pieces. I'll use a little square to make sure I find center here. By doing that, you end up with two slightly off lines, and then that's easier to find the space right in between those two. Make a very gentle center punch mark. So if you're off because the center punch is blocking your view, you can fix it and then deepen it. And then I'm going to carry that around and do the exact same thing on the other side. Sorry if my hand is in your way. And this gives me a mark I should be able to find again. And I can either just go with the center punch mark, but I think I'm going to go ahead and take our slitting chisel. I'm going to put it centered on that mark. And I'm going to make a little chisel mark. And that'll be a much easier mark to index the same chisel right back into later. It pays to get this mark straight. I'm a little crooked, so I'm going to correct and remark. That's better. So I got two little chisel cuts now that I can find, one on this side and one on this side, and I should be able to find that even after we upset this. So let's get it hot and upset this back down to create some mass for the blade. Now I'm just going to go ahead and start this in the vise. You could cut that point off, but if you do that, you're losing material, and there's so little material anyways. But this is going to fold over a little bit, so to avoid a cold shut, I need to go back to the anvil and straighten that out. The idea here isn't to thin this anymore, or thin it again. It's just to keep that cold shut from propagating or getting worse. This does slip down in the vise, but it guarantees that I'm not messing up the head down here to do it in the vise unsupported. It does make it a little bit more of a pain, but I think we'll be better off in the long run. You could also heat this with a torch. and not have to go back to the forge each time. But since it slips, I'm not sure that it matters. You got to readjust it in the vise anyways. So we're at least down to a flat point, but I definitely like to have a marked upset there to have more mass. So I'm going to keep going. It's certainly an improvement, and I think I want to go 1 or 2 more heats. It's still not very much of a bulge. I actually use the peen a little bit and start spreading it the direction I'm going to want it to go later. Not a big deal right now, but it won't hurt. We're getting a little bit more bulge. Looks like I might get a cold shut there if I keep going though, so I'm going to have to go back to the anvil and knock that down. So a lot of back and forth. We're just going to kind of bevel the end to concentrate the blows back towards the center a little bit. Then we're going to go back after it. I think I'm going to go ahead and come to the anvil because it is slipping so badly in the vise. And I'm going to see if I can find some kind of a little swedge that I can put that head in so that it isn't being flattened. I can always file it back and make it look pretty when we're done if I need to. But if I can keep it in good shape now, that's my preference. This is some giant rivet set. Some big industrial rivet set, and I've got a whole bunch of these that fit pretty nicely in my hardy hole, and they have various round depressions in them. And I think that might protect our head so we can come to the anvil and it won't slip as badly as doing it in the vise. I should say it shouldn't slip at all, but we will deform it a little bit more because it's going to take on that S shape. Always a problem trying to upset skinny stock. But we've got a lot more mass at the end now. And it tapers back, so that's going to make a much nicer axe-shaped blade. Anytime you're upsetting, a critical part is getting it straight again, because it always wants to go off. I think I'm pretty happy with this the way it is. We have gone from just under a ½ an inch for this to about 5/8 of an inch. So that's a much nicer mass of material. It doesn't seem like much, but it's going to make a big difference when we get around to forming a blade. So let's do our eye. I'm going to see if this will hold nicely in our little clamping fixture we made a while back. But I want the head up off the anvil so it doesn't get deformed every time we do this. So hopefully I've got enough clamping ability in this thing. And my wedge is too small. That's too bad. But I think I can make it work. It's a little awkward, but I think that's going to be okay. We'll center our eye over the support block there. It's going to cool down some because it takes a little fiddling to get everything set up, but I don't think it's going to take that long to cut through this. Do remember to cool your punch from time to time. That's about as far as I want to go at that heat. And this is all pretty much just the same. I've sort of squished my chisel mark here, so I'm kind of starting just with a little line that I can't quite index into, but I think we got it pretty good. That eye is going off a little bit, so I'm going to try and steer it over a little bit. It's a bigger problem in skinny material if your eye starts to go off. There are ways to fix it. We are actually through. I see daylight there. I don't know if you can see it or not. So we'll take that chisel and go through again and open that slot up a little bit, and then we're going to be into shaping the eye. Now this side we're nice and centered, which is good because it's the top, and the fact that we're a little off center on the bottom will not be as obvious. So we're going to come back through from the first side, alternating every time here. So this eye is going much better than the pyramid style punch eye. And that's pretty good. I think we're done with the actual slitting part of the eye. So now you can probably see that hole a little bit better. A little bit of rag in there. I'll try to clean that up. In fact, I'll probably just do that cold here because it'll clean up pretty easily. Now in the real world, making this punch a little bit longer and holding it in your hand would be a lot easier, or chisel, excuse me. That was just part of the challenge though, so that's much cleaner. That's ready to start opening up, and we're going to use the chisel to open it a little bit, and then we'll go to the drift. We just don't quite have enough room for the drift. Well, it's close though. But we'll use the chisel and we'll put it in there and we'll start to drift it with the chisel. I'm going to need some kind of a bolster though. This doesn't have a hole in it and I've got to be able to drive through. I mentioned the eye looks good on this side, but we're a little off here. Now that I'm going to start stretching this, one of the ways to help correct that being off is to heat this side more or cool that. Since it's tool steel, I don't want to pour water on that side, so I'm going to put this side down in the fire and try and get it just a little bit hotter, and that should make the eye want to move over in that area. So you can see we're a little bit hotter on the side that's fat. I cooled this off a little so I can actually hold on to it. And this will take a few heats. It cools off really quick, but you can already see we're starting to open it up. And it just almost starts to go through. I want it to actually poke through a little bit before I go to the drift. Otherwise you end up kind of pushing the sides in. You can end up with some little rag in there. And this is just a piece of 1/2-inch square bar that I'm using as a bolster. It's one we made in an earlier video. Very simple to do if you need a quickie bolster. And it's starting to center that eye up much better. I'm going to keep cooling this. I don't want my chisel to get too hot. Now remember, this is an S7 chisel. It's an air hardening steel. I'm cooling it in water, but it is not up to red heat. If it was at a red heat, I would not cool it in water between heats here. A real good chance of cracking it. A lot of people won't cool it in water ever, but I feel okay with that. So that eye is a lot more symmetrical now. I think we did a pretty good job fixing that. It looks pretty good from both sides. Now for a Tomahawk, the handles are typically removable. People like to throw these and they break handles, so it's real easy to knock it out. And that punch doesn't pick up on anything. I've been drifting from this with the chisel, from this side, which is actually the back, and I want that to be the skinny side in the long run. But I've been doing that because that's where it was uneven, and that way that chisel was pushing on the fat side of the eye and not over here where it was already symmetrical. But now I'm going to only drift from this side. And I got to figure out where I can do that. My drift will not fit through this bolster, so I either need a different bolster or I'm going to have to figure something else out here. So we'll be back in just a second. Who knows what this thing is from, but it looks just right. It is hot on your little fingers. I'm going to be over the pritchel hole so I can drive it clear in. And then we're going to start spreading some little ears out on this. And I'm going to try and bring this eye and make it a little bit fatter there. So that'll take a few heats. And I want my drift to be fairly hot so that it doesn't cool this off too fast each time. So I can only pick the drift up with my hands the first time. You can see we're starting to get something. Trying to knock that out without shooting it across the floor, but so that eye is starting to take the shape I want. You notice it's got the little teardrop in the very front there. This is just a back and forth process. I think I'm going to switch my tongs around though, so it's not pinned between the bolster and the tip of the tongs there. Now while I would like to add more, I'm upside down. Well, let me do that. While I would like to add more height to this eye by drawing ears out further, it is about as thin as I want it to be. It's too thin for a bigger Tomahawk, but for this little thing it'll be just fine. So that's about all I'm going to do to that. And there's our eye. It's a little bit crooked. We may see if we can try to straighten it, but if we can't, we can get in there with a file and file that part. It'll look just fine. Don't be afraid to use a file if you need to. So I'm going to make one heat to see if I can push this over a little bit and get the drift to fill in a little better. But I don't really want to get the eye any thinner, so I got to be careful. And here again, I've heated the part that's a little bit too big. I'm going to try and draw it out just a little bit. And it's not really going anywhere, so I think we're just going to leave it the way it is. And that's what I'm going to call good for the eye. Now we're going to turn it around and we're going to do the blade. So this is just a matter of drawing out a blade the shape you want it to be. I'm going to peen it with a cross peen. I'm going to work on both sides to keep the work even and to keep the stress even. So that's starting. It's still about 1/4 of an inch thick, so we can get a lot more spread from that. The other thing I want to do is try to make it mostly curved down, and that's just because I like them that way better. And by that I mean I want it straighter across the top and most of the blade below the top line of the Tomahawk. Make sure you keep the eye off the edge of the anvil so you don't flatten it. This would be a good place for an anvil block, and I think I'll go to that next. By using the anvil block, I can get the eye off the anvil and get the blade right to the edge. And that is much more effective. But I'm going to need to straighten that out again because it's too symmetrical this way. Like I say, I want to drop it all down lower. Okay, I forgot to show you this step. Sorry. I used a top fuller to bring this down. It took just a few blows. So the idea is just to make this straighter across the back, and this is much better. I'm still going to need to try and bring this blade out a little here, but we're just almost done. I'm using the corner of my hammer face like a peen to try and bring this out just a little bit more there. There will certainly be filing and grinding to be done. It cools off quick, so we need to get it back in the fire. The closer you can come to your finished shape at the anvil, the less work you're going to have to do filing or grinding later. But there's almost always some filing or grinding later, it seems like. I'd like to bring the middle of that blade up just a little bit. Just start refining it. I'm going to a smaller hammer just to be a little bit more delicate. And try and blend everything in here. Now, as a result of dropping the blade down the way I like it, I actually end up with too much material at the top corner. I don't want it that kicked back, so I'm going to have to sacrifice some and trim that just a little bit. By trimming this hot at the anvil, you save yourself some filing or grinding later. But if you've got a big belt grinder, this only takes a second to grind off. This is where a helper comes in handy to either help you hold or to help swing the hammer with a handled tool, and things don't get chased around quite so much. So that's pretty much the profile we're going for. I'm going to put my touch mark in this over at the treadle hammer and then come back to the anvil, try to straighten everything out, put the drift through one more time, which is kind of a pain because of how much stuff hangs through there, but we can figure out how to do that. And then I think I've got my touch mark in there. I'm just going to kind of clean this up Mostly just making sure it's straight at this point. It's real easy for things to be twisted. So you want to keep working to get the twist out. I think we've got our twist out of there. It's going to be a cute little tomahawk, that's for sure. So the last step is to drift the eye again, or the last forging step I should say. Again, I drift only from the top on this style of axe. Other axes are done differently. And just make sure we haven't messed up our eye somehow in the rest of the forging operation. So here is the finished forging for the railroad spike tomahawk, made out of a mini railroad spike that was made out of a piece of approximately 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square by 3 inch long repurposed coil spring. It's a complicated process, but it's purely a part of that blacksmith challenge concept, and there's lots of other ways to achieve this without going through all the song and dance of mini tools and all that I did. So now this needs to de-stress. That means either normalizing or annealing. This is where we'll stop with the first part. We've completed all the forging for the little tomahawk. We'll pick this up again tomorrow with a discussion about normalizing versus annealing, and then move on to the hardening and tempering of the little spiked tomahawk. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe. Wear your safety glasses. See you later.